So our chapter was chapter 8, entitled And No Birds Sing from Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And I'm Celeste.
I'm Chelsea.
And this chapter was much more than about birds, which is why we have these lovely leaves here on our PowerPoint. So we'll get to that in just a minute.
So the first chapter basically tells you how there was a strange disappearance of local bird life, which was mostly like the robins there. And it was caused because scientists were spraying elm trees with a DDT pesticide, which was in turn like getting to the birds. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But they were spraying for Dutch elm disease because they were worried that it was being carried by beetles throughout these trees. And they wanted to kill the insects like the beetles and the worms. But the birds were eating the worms, and so it was getting into the bird systems.
Basically, it was just a huge catalyst, with the starter being Dutch elm disease, being controlled by DDT, which just was this huge snowball effect, killing and hurting a lot of the ecosystem. So in the photo of the tree, that's Dutch elm disease from a physical point of view. The leaves are rotting, falling apart. The tree is just dying. And on the lower picture are some eggs of birds that have been affected by the DDT pesticides.
So it strongly influenced food webs. So like they sprayed the elm trees, and then it got into like the worms since they were living in the soil. But the birds were eating the worms, and so were raccoons, possums, and moles. And then also bald eagles were affected, and in turn humans were affected because all kind of their surrounding nature was disappearing. Like there weren't many birds anymore. Somebody talked about how they used to look out their window and there were like so many birds, and then there was only like 1 or 2 left.
The elms were dying despite the spraying by DDT. It wasn't working. People didn't understand. They just kept spraying. But the elms continued to die. Rachel states that in her book, between 1951 and 1956, Syracuse still lost nearly 3,000 elms. So this wasn't helping, this wasn't the solution, and it was affecting every single thing in the food chain.
So, present day, DDT is now banned because of all of its effects, and it's been banned since 1972, and there's still no cure for Dutch elm disease, but it is being treated. And it's being treated by injecting fungus-killing bacteria into the tree, and also injections to protect the healthy trees so they don't end up getting Dutch elm disease. And the diseased trees are usually removed from the locations and discarded.
So these issues really don't exist like Rachel Carson was talking about in her book. They've pretty much been controlled, and the birds are back. So it's definitely improved. Case studies for the Dutch elm disease. There are many groups that are still working to control this disease because it's still out there. There's no known cure, but the Elm Restoration Project by the Forestry Sciences Laboratory and the Northern Research Station, they're planting DED-resistant trees. Basically, they're trees that have been treated, genetically to be not immune, but can withstand DED or Dutch elm disease. So, do you want to talk about what Dutch elm disease actually, how it works?
Dutch elm disease, it's a disease that basically gets into the tree and it just makes them deteriorate.
Yeah, it's carried by this little beetle that carries the disease on its back on spores, which then travel into trees, which is why this is such a hard thing to control, and it's not easy. But then we move on to the bald eagles. In 1963, there were fewer than 500 pairs. They were on America's most endangered species list for many, many years. There was a case of a Florida man who monitored bald eagles just for the fun of it, and as he would talk about the nest, and he would see how many eggs were in the nest, and then he slowly started to notice that there weren't as many bald eagles, there weren't as many nests, and even when there were nests, there were no eggs in them, or the eggs were dead. There was nothing in them.
But now, since since after like the treatment since DDT spraying is now not allowed, there are more than 5,000 pairs of bald eagles.
They were actually taken off the endangered species list not too long ago, and we're seeing them now in Pennsylvania, even down at the Allegheny River, you can see bald eagles. So they've resurged. Okay, and here is the video. This is a video just showing how they treat the trees. It's kind of neat. They just give them a vaccine with a huge needle like they do with people and vaccines. So.
Well, this is the first time that we're actually going to be using. Thing you would do is you would check the tree for signs of all Dutch elm disease infections. Since we're dealing with a true vaccine here, we need to be sure that the elm tree we're about to vaccinate is still healthy and in good shape. If we get the vaccine out of the cooler, we have to bring the vaccine, which is stored in these vials, to the site in the cooler because it's a living product. You have to keep it cool. And then we take the injection tool out of its case, which is this one. And in order to start the inoculation, you slide and click the vaccine into the inoculation tool. One inoculation has to be made every 10 centimeters in circumference of the tree at breast height. And the inoculation itself is nothing more than pushing a chisel through the bark, releasing one drop of vaccine, and twisting the gun slightly sideways just before it hits the bark, and you're done. And that's all it takes. So it will take you a minute or two to treat one such a tree before you can move on to the next one. At this point in time, the registration process for the vaccine is an ongoing process, but Health Canada has granted us a research authorization to do a trial on about 200 elm trees in the city of Winnipeg. The process has been in use in the Netherlands since 1992 and in the United States since 1995, and this year, 2009, for the first time in Canada.
So this is that. So they're in Winnipeg doing that. So the places that we saw doing it in the United States, planting those DED-resistant trees, includes Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But they're treating Dutch elm disease all over the place. Wherever there's elms, they have to take precaution. So,
so opinions on the problems is that it was not treated properly, and people attacked the beetle for carrying the disease instead of the fungus, which was the disease itself. And people like who were for DDT spraying didn't think of the consequences of all the animal life and the birds and everything before they poisoned our ecosystem. And the short-sighted solution, which was to just inject everything with DDT, that wasn't the answer. They should have thought about it before the case, and other solutions should have been considered.
Exactly, and people in Rachel Carson's book, people were talking about whether they want elms or whether they want birds. And they said in the long run, well, we want birds because, there's other trees. But luckily we, kind of tackled both, and we can still have our elms, but, also we're not impacting the other wildlife as well. The solutions, careful monitoring and treatment of Dutch elm disease. Since this was the catalyst, this was really the root of the problem. So they need to manage this by injecting fungus-killing bacteria into the tree. This is the most common route, and this is the most practical route, we think. The injections not only help kill the disease, but they also protect the healthy trees. And Rachel Carson stated in the later end of this chapter that really the solution was much simpler than spraying with chemicals. All you had to do was take the infected parts of the tree or the whole tree itself and discard of it, burn it before the springtime, before the beetles can come out and transfer it. So it was really much simpler, and that's really what we do today to help manage this. And it's not hard, and it's pretty easy. And another solution is to discuss and test all pesticides before introducing them into nature, which is common sense. We need to know the impacts of what we're putting into the environment, not just in terms of pesticides, but everything we do, because it all has this tumbling effect as we see how it affects the food web and just the entire biodiversity. Any questions?